Dante Mancini walked into Celeste Beaumont's life through a school gate on the first Tuesday of September. And Celeste was not looking for anyone. And the furniture of her life had been arranged exactly the way she needed it. And none of that mattered at all. The first Tuesday of September at Pinecrest Elementary School in Wilmington, North Carolina, was the kind of morning that the Carolina coast does in early fall, warm but not heavy. The light coming off the water 2 miles east with the specific golden clarity that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. And Celeste Beaumont was standing at the school gate at 7:50 a.m., because Celeste Beaumont was always at the school gate at 7:50 a.m., which was 20 minutes before the bell and 40 minutes before her first class, because Celeste had learned in 9 years of teaching that the school gate in the morning was where you learned things about your students that the classroom never showed you. Who arrived hungry? Who arrived afraid? Who arrived with the specific tight-shouldered tension of a child carrying something from home that should have been left at home. And Celeste was watching the gate when the black car pulled up. It was not an ostentatious car. That was the first thing Celeste noticed, because ostentatious cars appeared at Pinecrest Elementary approximately never, and when they did they announced themselves with the specific energy of people who wanted to be seen arriving in them. But this car was just black and clean and quietly expensive in the way of things that do not need to announce their cost because their quality does it without help. And the door opened, and a boy got out, 10 years old, dark-haired, serious-faced, wearing his backpack with the straps adjusted to exactly the right tension, the backpack of a child who had packed it himself and packed it carefully. And then the driver got out. And Celeste, who had been a teacher for 9 years and had developed in those 9 years the specific professional ability to assess a situation from a distance and form an accurate preliminary judgment before she reached it, looked at the man who got out of the black car and formed no preliminary judgment at all, because the preliminary judgment function appeared to have temporarily stopped working. He was tall, 6'1", perhaps 6'2", with the dark hair of his son and the broad shoulders of a man who had spent his adult life carrying things, and a face that was the specific combination of strong-featured and genuinely warm that you did not encounter often and that, when you did, tended to stop whatever you were doing. He was wearing a dark jacket over a simple shirt, and he was looking at his son with an expression of such complete and unperformed attention, the look of a father who is fully present at 7:50 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with nowhere else to be in his mind, that Celeste found herself looking at the expression rather than the face, and the boy said something to his father, and the father laughed, and the laugh was quiet and real, and the boy walked through the gate, and the man looked up, and his eyes found Celeste. And Celeste, who had been standing at this gate for 9 years and had looked at approximately 40,000 arriving parents and guardians without once losing the thread of what she was doing, said, "Good morning." And the man said, "Good morning." And the man said, "I am Dante Mancini. My son Marco is starting 5th grade today." And Celeste said, "I am Ms. Beaumont. I teach 5th grade." And Dante Mancini looked at her for a moment. And Dante said, "Then I will be seeing you." And Celeste said, "Yes." And Dante nodded and got back in his car, and the car pulled away, and Celeste stood at the gate and watched it go and thought, well, and then Celeste went back to watching the arriving students because that was what she was here for, but Celeste did not entirely stop thinking about the laugh. Marco Mancini sat in the 3rd row of Celeste's 5th grade classroom on that first Tuesday and said almost nothing for the entire day. But Marco listened with the specific comprehensive attention of a child who has been taught by someone somewhere, with great patience, that listening is the most important thing you can do in a new room. And Celeste noticed this. Celeste noticed everything about her students in the first week. It was the skill that 9 years had built in her above all others, the ability to read a classroom the way other people read text. And what Celeste read in Marco Mancini in that first week was careful, loyal, deeply intelligent, and carrying something private that he had decided not to put down. And Celeste recognized that combination because she had spent 3 years carrying something private herself. the specific interior weight of a woman whose husband had walked out on a Tuesday morning when Amara was 6 years old and had not come back, and had offered no explanation that was sufficient for any of the questions it generated. And Amara Beaumont, who sat 2 rows from Marco, decided within 4 days that Dante Mancini was her best friend. And Amara had not made a best friend in 2 years, since Keisha moved to Charlotte in 3rd grade, and the specific joy of watching her daughter arrive home from school talking about Marco, about what Marco said in science, about how Marco had helped her with the long division problem that had been resisting all week, was a joy that Celeste allowed herself completely and without qualification, because Amara's happiness was always sufficient reason for anything. And it was through Amara that the second conversation with Dante Mancini happened. On the Friday of the 2nd week of school, at the gate at 3:15, when Celeste was standing in her usual end-of-day position and Dante arrived in the black car. And Amara ran to Marco and Marco ran to Dante, and Amara's momentum carried her to Dante too, and Amara said, with the specific unfiltered directness of a 9-year-old who has decided someone is safe, "You must be Marco's dad. I am Amara. Marco helped me with math." And Dante looked at this child, at her open face and her direct eyes and the complete absence of self-consciousness in her introduction, and Dante smiled. And the smile was the same as the laugh, real, unperformed. And Dante said, "Marco told me about you. He said you were the funniest person in the class." And Amara said, "I am the funniest person in the whole school." And Dante laughed again, and Celeste reached them. And Dante looked up. And Dante said, "Ms. Beaumont." And Celeste said, "Mr. Mancini." And Dante said, "Our children appear to have decided something." And Celeste said, "They do that." And Dante said, "Marco has not had a real friend since we moved here from Charlotte 8 months ago." And Dante said it simply, without drama, the way people say things that are true and important and that they have decided to say out loud because the person in front of them seems like someone who will receive it correctly. And Celeste looked at him. And Celeste said, "Amara either. Not since 3rd grade." And they stood at the school gate on a Friday afternoon in September while their children chased each other around the flagpole and talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular and everything that mattered. And Celeste drove home thinking about the smile. What Dante Mancini actually was did not announce itself. And this was by design, 20 years of careful, methodical construction of a life that looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was claimed to be. Dante Mancini Properties LLC had offices on 3rd Street in downtown Wilmington, and a portfolio of commercial and residential properties across coastal North Carolina that was substantial enough to be credible and diverse enough to be uninteresting to anyone looking for patterns. The offices had a receptionist and 2 junior associates, and a property manager named Greg, who handled the day-to-day operations with the pleasant efficiency of someone who was very good at his job, and very carefully did not ask questions about the parts of the business that Greg's job description did not cover. And the parts that Greg's job description did not cover were managed by Tommy Rixey from a different office in a different building on a different street that did not appear in any business registration, and that Detective Sharon Ockhaffer of the Wilmington PD had been attempting to locate the physical address of for 14 months. But Dante did not bring any of that to the school gate. Dante brought the black car and the dark jacket and the real laugh and the complete attention he gave his son every morning at 7:50 a.m. And over the weeks of September and into October, Dante and Celeste built, in the specific slow, careful way of 2 people who have both been through something and have both decided not to rush anything, a friendship that was warmer than friendship and more careful than anything more than friendship, and that both of them understood without discussing it, was moving in a direction that neither of them had planned for. And in the Pinecrest neighborhood around the school, Richard Sloane's people were moving too. Quietly at first, letters arriving in mailboxes, buyout offers slipped under doors, a representative from Sloane Development Group appearing at the neighborhood association meeting with a presentation, and a smile and numbers that looked generous until you understood what the numbers meant, which was that the people accepting them would be leaving Pinecrest permanently because the prices being offered would not purchase equivalent housing anywhere in Wilmington or the surrounding area, and the neighborhood pushed back. And the letters kept coming, and 3 families on Oleander Drive accepted offers and moved out in October, and the houses sat empty, and the empty houses had a weight to them that the neighborhood felt, and Celeste felt it too, because 4 of the children in her classroom lived on Oleander Drive, and Celeste could see the weight in them. And Celeste said nothing about it at the school gate because the school gate was not the place, but Celeste was watching, and Celeste was thinking. And Celeste was beginning to understand that whatever was happening in the neighborhood was going to reach her classroom eventually. And Celeste was a 5th grade teacher from Pinecrest who had grown up 2 streets from where she now taught. And Celeste was not going to let it happen without a fight. The first time Dante came to Celeste's classroom was a Thursday afternoon in October when Marco had stayed late for the science fair project, and Dante arrived to collect him at 5 p.m. and found the school nearly empty and the classroom lights still on. And Dante knocked on the open door, and Celeste looked up from the papers she was grading, and Dante said, "He is still working." And Celeste looked at Marco at the back table surrounded by poster board and colored markers and said, "He has been at that for 2 hours. He will not let me help." And Dante said, "He does not let anyone help." And Dante said, "I wonder where he got that from." And Celeste said, "Do you want coffee?" And the question surprised them both slightly because it was the kind of question that moves a thing from one category to another. And Dante said, "Yes." And Celeste made coffee from the small machine on her desk that the Parents Association had given her 3 Christmases ago, and that she used approximately 6 times a day. And Dante sat in the chair beside her desk, the chair where parents sat during conferences, the chair that Celeste had an entire professional relationship with, the chair of difficult conversations and hopeful ones. And they talked while Marco worked at the back table. And the conversation moved the way conversations move when both people are finally relaxed enough to say true things. And Dante said, "You grew up here, in Pinecrest." And Celeste said, 2 streets over, my mother still lives there. And Dante said, "And you came back to teach here." And Celeste said, "I could not imagine teaching anywhere else. These are my kids. Their parents are people I grew up with. Their grandparents knew my grandparents." And Celeste said, "This neighborhood made me. I owe it something." And Dante looked at her. And Dante said, "I understand that more than you know." And Celeste said, "Tell me." And Dante was quiet for a moment, and Dante said, "My father built something here, something that mattered to him, and I have spent 10 years trying to figure out what I owe it, and whether owing it and wanting to walk away from it can exist at the same time." And Celeste looked at him, and Celeste said, "What did your father build?" And Dante looked at his coffee. And Dante said, "Something complicated." And Marco called from the back table, "Dad, come look." And Dante went to look. And the conversation ended there. But the thing it had started did not end. Richard Sloan arrived in Wilmington in person in November, and Richard Sloan did not come to the Neighborhood Association meeting, and he did not come with a presentation. Richard Sloan came to a private dinner at the Cape Fear Club with 4 city council members and the deputy director of the city's planning department, and left 3 hours later with commitments that the Neighborhood Association had been trying to prevent for 8 months. And the following Monday morning, the Wilmington Star News ran a front-page article about the Pinecrest Waterfront Development Project. $400 million, 200 luxury residential units, a marina, a hotel, and the article described the project in the warm language of economic development and urban revitalization, and did not once use the word displacement, though displacement was the precise and accurate word for what the project required. And Celeste read the article at her kitchen table before school, and Celeste's mother Lena called at 7 a.m. and said, "You saw it?" And Celeste said, "Yes." And Lena said, "They are going to take everything." And Celeste said, "No, they are not." And Lena said, "Baby." And Celeste said, "Mama, no, they are not." And Celeste brought the article to school. And Celeste said nothing to her students about it because her students were 10 years old and the article was an adult problem. But Celeste spent the lunch hour on the phone with 3 other teachers and with Principal Nash, and with a woman named Beverly Odom who ran the Pinecrest Neighborhood Association, and who had been fighting Richard Sloane's acquisition campaign for 8 months, with the specific exhausted determination of someone who has been right about everything and ignored for all of it. And Beverly said, "The Anchor property is the problem. If Sloane gets the Mancini block, the whole development is viable. Without it, the financing does not work." And Celeste said, "The Mancini block." And Beverly said, 6 parcels on the south end of the development footprint, commercial and residential, all owned by Dante Mancini Properties. Sloane has offered twice. Both times Mancini said no, but Sloane is not going to stop offering. And Celeste said, "What do you know about Mancini?" And Beverly said, "Property developer. Came here from Charlotte about a year ago. Keeps to himself. Quiet." And Beverly said, "Why?" And Celeste said, "His son is in my class." And Beverly was quiet for a moment. And Beverly said, "Celeste." And Celeste said, "I know." And Beverly said, "Be careful." And Celeste said, "I am always careful." But Celeste's hand was still on the phone after she hung up. And Celeste was thinking about the Thursday afternoon and the coffee and the something complicated. November brought the cold off the water and brought Dante and Celeste closer in the specific way that cold weather brings people together. More time inside, more reason to linger, the school gate conversations extending past the point where the cold should have ended them. And one Friday evening, the 4 of them, Celeste, Amara, Dante, Marco, ended up at a diner on Market Street because Amara had said she was hungry and Marco had said he knew a place, and Dante had looked at Celeste and Celeste had said, "Why not?" And the 4 of them sat in a booth and ordered pancakes at 6 p.m. because Marco said pancakes were better at dinner than at breakfast, and nobody argued with him. And Amara fell asleep against Celeste's shoulder before the check came. And Dante looked at the 2 of them and said nothing for a moment. And then Dante said, "Thank you." And Celeste said, "For what?" And Dante said, "For being someone my son trusts. He does not trust easily." And Celeste said, "Neither does mine." And Celeste looked at Amara sleeping against her and said, "She has not been this happy in 3 years, since her father left." And Dante said, "What happened?" And Celeste said, "He decided he wanted a different life." And Dante said, "Did he say that?" And Celeste said, "Not in those words, but in every word he used." And Dante looked at his coffee. And Dante said, "My wife died 4 years ago. Marco was 6. And Celeste said, "I am sorry." And Dante said, "She was the better part of what I was trying to be." And Celeste looked at him. And Dante said, "I'm still trying to figure out how to be that part without her." And Celeste said, "I think you are doing better than you know." And Dante looked at her. And the look was the look of a man who has been given something he did not expect and is deciding whether he is allowed to keep it. And Celeste looked back. And the diner was warm. And Amara was asleep. And outside the window, Wilmington went about its ordinary, extraordinary business. Tommy Rixey came to Dante's house on a Sunday morning in December and stood in the kitchen and told Dante that Richard Sloane had hired 2 men from Atlanta to come to Wilmington. And Tommy said, "They are not negotiators." And Dante said, "I know what they are." And Tommy said, "This means he is done offering." And Dante said, "I know what it means." And Tommy said, "So what do we do?" And Dante stood at the kitchen window looking at the backyard where Marco was kicking a soccer ball against the fence in the December cold. And Dante said, "We handle it." And Tommy said, "The way we used to handle things." And Dante said, "No, not the way we used to." And Tommy said, "Dante." And Dante said, "I said no. Find me another way." And Tommy said, "There may not be another way." And Dante said, "Then find me the beginning of one." And Tommy looked at Dante for a moment. And Tommy said, "She is changing you." And Dante said, "Good." And Tommy picked up his keys, and Tommy said, "I hope she is worth what this is going to cost." And Dante said, "She does not even know about any of this yet." And Tommy said, "That is the part I am worried about." And Tommy left. And Dante stayed at the kitchen window, and Marco kicked the ball against the fence. And the December light came through the window cold and clear. Detective Sharon Ockhaffer had been building her case on the Mancini organization for 3 years, with the specific patient thoroughness of someone who understands that the case that lasts is the case that is built completely rather than quickly. And in December, Sharon Ockhaffer's case gained a new element that she had not anticipated. because Sharon Acaffer had been following the Sloan Development Group's acquisition campaign in Pinecrest as a separate investigation. The bribery of city officials was a federal matter, but the local predatory acquisition tactics were a state matter, and Sharon had jurisdiction. And when the two investigations intersected at the Mancini Anchor property, Sharon had spent a week sitting with the intersection before she decided what to do with it. And what Sharon decided to do with it was go to the school. Not to Celeste directly. Not yet. But Sharon Acaffer drove past Pinecrest Elementary on 3 consecutive mornings in December and watched the school gate. And on the second morning, Sharon saw the black car. And Sharon saw Dante Mancini walk his son through the gate and exchange 20 minutes of conversation with the teacher at the gate. And Sharon watched the conversation, the body language, the proximity, the specific quality of attention both people were giving each other, and Sharon understood what she was looking at. And Sharon said to herself quietly in the car, "Oh no." And Sharon meant it with the full weight of a detective who has just watched a complication arrive. And Sharon drove back to the precinct. And Sharon opened her file on Dante Mancini. And Sharon looked at the file for a long time. And Sharon thought about what she was going to have to do. And Sharon thought about the teacher at the gate and the way the teacher had been laughing at something Mancini said. And Sharon thought, "I am sorry." And then Sharon picked up her phone. Christmas came to the Pinecrest neighborhood the way it always came. Lights on the houses that had been on the street long enough to know how to celebrate. The smell of food from open doors on Christmas Eve. Children running between houses with the specific freedom of a neighborhood that is still a neighborhood, that still has the density of relationship that makes children safe between houses. And Celeste walked her mother's street on Christmas Eve and looked at the empty houses on Oleander Drive, 3 now dark windows, no lights, and felt the weight of them the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. The absence where something should be, and Celeste's phone buzzed. And the message was from Dante. And the message said, "Merry Christmas, Ms. Beaumont," and Celeste smiled. And Celeste typed back, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Mancini." And the response came immediately. "I think we're past Mr. and Ms." and Celeste typed, "I think you might be right." And Lena appeared in the doorway of the house and said, "Who are you smiling at?" and Celeste said, "Nobody." And Lena said, "Nobody makes you look like that. I want to meet nobody." And Celeste put her phone in her pocket and went inside, but the smile stayed. And in his house on the other side of Wilmington, Dante sat in the living room after Marco had gone to bed and looked at his phone. And Tommy had called twice and Dante had not answered because it was Christmas Eve and Tommy's calls were never about Christmas Eve things. And Dante thought about Celeste. And Dante thought about what Tommy had said, "She does not even know about any of this yet." And Dante thought, "She needs to know. Before it gets any closer. She needs to know from me, not from someone else." And Dante thought about how to say it and what to say and in what order the words needed to come. And Dante could not find the order. And the fire in the living room burned down, and Marco slept upstairs, and Dante sat with the thing he had not said. January brought the Sloan Development Group's public announcement of the Pinecrest waterfront project. A press conference at City Hall with renderings and timelines, and the Deputy Director of Planning standing beside Richard Sloan's representatives with the specific careful expression of a man who has been paid to look enthusiastic and is managing the performance. And the Neighborhood Association held an emergency meeting at Pinecrest Elementary School that Friday evening in the gymnasium, and 112 people came, which was every adult in the neighborhood who could find a way to be there. And the meeting was loud and frightened and angry in the specific way of people who have been watching something approach for a long time and have finally run out of road. And Celeste sat at the front table beside Beverly Odom and Principal Nash, and spoke for 11 minutes about what the development would mean for the school. The displacement of students, the fracturing of the community that made the school work, the specific irreplaceable quality of a neighborhood school that has been in the same place long enough to have relationships that span generations. And Celeste spoke with the full force of everything she had her 9 years in that classroom. Her childhood on that street, her mother in that neighborhood, Amara in that school. And the gymnasium was quiet while she spoke in the specific way that a room full of frightened people goes quiet when someone says true things in a voice that does not flinch. And at the back of the gymnasium, standing against the wall because he had arrived after all the seats were taken, was Dante Mancini. And Celeste did not see him until she sat down. And when Celeste saw him, she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them looked away for a moment. And Celeste thought, he knows what is happening. He has always known. The Anchor property, the Mancini block. And Celeste thought about Beverly's voice on the phone, be careful. And Celeste looked at the man against the wall, the man with the real laugh and the complete attention and the something complicated, and did not know what to do with what she was looking at. And Dante, against the wall, looked at Celeste at the front table and thought, she is fighting for this, with everything she has. And Dante thought, so am I, just not in the same room. And Dante thought, that has to change. Dante called Beverly Odom on a Monday morning in January. And Beverly answered, and Dante said, my name is Dante Mancini. I own the Anchor property on the south end of the development footprint. And Beverly said nothing for a moment, and Beverly said, I know who you are. And Dante said, I want to help. And Beverly said, how? And Dante said, I am not selling to Sloan. And Beverly said, I know that too. And Dante said, but not selling is not enough. Sloan is going to find another way to make the project work or make the holdouts impossible. I need to give the neighborhood something more permanent than my refusal. And Beverly said, what are you proposing? And Dante said, a community land trust. The Mancini parcels transferred into a permanent community ownership structure that removes them from the commercial market entirely. No sale possible. No development possible without community consent, permanently. And Beverly was quiet for a long moment. And Beverly said that would end the project. And Dante said yes. And Beverly said, why would you do that? And Dante said, because it is the right thing. And Beverly said, that is not a real estate developer's answer. And Dante said, no, it is not. And Beverly said, Mr. Mancini, what are you? And Dante said, someone trying to be better than what I have been. And Beverly said, I will call my attorney today. And Dante hung up and sat in his 3rd Street office and looked at the wall. And Tommy came in and looked at Dante's face and said, you did it. And Dante said, yes. And Tommy said, Sloan is going to come at you hard. And Dante said, I know. And Tommy said, and Aquifer is still building. And Dante said, I know that too. And Tommy said, so what is the plan? And Dante said, the plan is to do the right thing and accept whatever comes with it. And Tommy said, that is not a plan, that is a prayer. And Dante said, sometimes that is all there is. Sharon Aquifer came to Celeste's door on a Wednesday evening in January. And Celeste opened the door and looked at the woman on her porch, professional, direct badge on her belt, and said, can I help you? And Sharon said, Ms. Beaumont, my name is Detective Sharon Aquifer. I am with the Wilmington Police Department, and I need to speak with you about Dante Mancini. And Celeste stood in her doorway for a moment. And Celeste said, come in. And Sharon came in and sat at Celeste's kitchen table and put a folder on the table. And Sharon said, I want to be honest with you about why I am here. And Celeste said, please. And Sharon said, Dante Mancini is the head of the Mancini Organized Crime Organization. His family has operated in coastal North Carolina for 30 years. Extortion, protection rackets, money laundering through the property portfolio. His father ran it before him, and Dante has been running it for 9 years. And Sharon slid a photograph across the table, and Celeste looked at the photograph, and the photograph showed Dante at a table with men Celeste did not recognize, in a room that was not a restaurant or an office. And Celeste looked at the photograph for a long time, and Sharon said, I know this is difficult. And Celeste said, are you investigating him? And Sharon said, yes. And Celeste said, is he going to be arrested? And Sharon said, that depends on choices he makes in the next several weeks. And Sharon said, and it depends on whether the people around him help us understand the full picture. And Celeste looked up from the photograph, and Celeste said, I'm not going to help you build a case against him. And Sharon said, Ms. Beaumont. And Celeste said, I am not, but I will tell you this. And Celeste said, whatever he is, whatever he has done, he is transferring the Anchor property into a community land trust. He's going to end Sloan's development project. And the look on Sharon Acker's face shifted, the professional composure adjusting around something she had not expected. And Sharon said, "He told you that?" And Celeste said, "No, Beverly Odom told me." And Sharon looked at the folder on the table, and Sharon said, "That changes some things." And Celeste said, "Yes, I imagine it does," and Sharon left. And Celeste sat at her kitchen table with the photograph still on it. And Celeste looked at it for a long time. And Celeste thought about the school gate and the diner and the pancakes at dinner and the message on Christmas Eve. And Celeste thought about the something complicated. And Celeste thought, he was trying to tell me. He just could not find the words. And Celeste thought, I understand that. More than he knows, Sloane's men from Atlanta made their move on a Thursday night in January. And they came to the 3rd Street office at 9 p.m. when the building was empty, except for Dante and Tommy. And what happened in the 3rd Street office that Thursday night was not something that Celeste knew about, and was not something that the newspaper covered, and was not something that appeared in Sharon Acker's case file in any detail, because the 2 men from Atlanta left Wilmington on Friday morning without completing what they had come to complete, and without filing any report with anyone about why they had left. And Tommy had a bruised jaw for a week, and Dante had a cut above his eye that he had covered with a bandage by Friday morning. And on Friday morning, Dante was at the school gate at 7:50 a.m., and Celeste was there. And Dante walked Marco through the gate, and Marco went to find Amara, and Dante turned to Celeste. And Celeste looked at the bandage above his eye. And Dante said, "I know." And Celeste said, "Are you all right?" And Dante said, "Yes." And Celeste said, "Dante." And Dante said, "I know, Celeste, I know. I need to tell you something. I have needed to tell you something for a long time, and I have not been able to find the right moment or the right words, and I have run out of both." And Celeste said, "A detective came to my house Wednesday evening." And Dante went very still. And Celeste said, "Sharon Acker." And Dante looked at her. And Dante said, "What did she tell you?" And Celeste said, "Enough." And Dante said, "Celeste." And Celeste said, "I know who you are." And Dante said, and Celeste said, "And I am standing here. Aren't I?" And Dante looked at her for a long moment. And the school gate morning moved around them, children arriving, parents waving, the ordinary Tuesday ritual of a neighborhood school doing what it had always done. And Dante said, "I am ending it, all of it. The trust is being finalized this week. After that there is nothing left worth protecting except Marco." And Celeste said, "And yourself?" And Dante said, "Yes." And Celeste said, "That matters too." And Dante said, "I know, I am learning that." And Celeste said, "Good, keep learning." And Celeste turned back to the arriving students, but she reached out as she turned and briefly, lightly, touched his hand. And Dante stood at the school gate in the January morning and felt something shift, not dramatically. Just the specific, small, permanent shift of a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and has been given permission, finally, to set part of it down. The Community Land Trust was finalized on a Tuesday in February, and Beverly Odom called Celeste at 7 a.m. that morning and said, "It is done." And Celeste said, "Say it again." And Beverly said, "It is done. The Mancini parcels are in permanent community trust. Sloane's financing is void. The project is over." And Beverly's voice on the phone had the specific quality of a person who has been fighting for a very long time and has arrived unexpectedly at the morning after the victory and is standing in it before the full reality of it arrives. And Beverly said, "Celeste, we won." And Celeste said, "Yes, we did." And Celeste sat down on her kitchen floor. Not because her legs gave out, because sitting on the kitchen floor was what Celeste did when something enormous happened and she needed to be close to the ground. And Amara came downstairs in her pajamas and saw her mother on the kitchen floor and said, "Mama." And Celeste said, "We are okay, baby. Everything is okay." And Amara sat down on the floor beside her mother, and Celeste put her arm around her daughter. And they sat on the kitchen floor together in the February morning, and the neighborhood outside the window was still there. All of it. Still there. Richard Sloane issued a statement through his attorney at noon that described the Community Land Trust as a legitimate exercise of property rights and wished the Pinecrest neighborhood well going forward. And the statement was 3 sentences long, and nobody who read it believed a word of it, but it was the statement of a man who had run out of moves and was performing grace in defeat, because performing grace was preferable to the alternative. And the Wilmington Star News ran the story on the front page. And the headline said, PINECREST SAVED, Community Land Trust Ends Waterfront Development Project. And the article mentioned Dante Mancini's name in the third paragraph as the property owner who had transferred the anchor parcels. And the article did not mention anything else about Dante Mancini. And Sharon Ackafer, reading the article at her desk at the precinct, made a note in her file. And the note said, "Cooperation possible. Approach accordingly." And Sharon closed the file and put it in the drawer and left it there for the rest of the day. March came to Wilmington with the first real warmth of the year, the coast deciding, after the long gray argument of winter, that spring was no longer a negotiation. And the school gate on the first warm Monday of March had a different quality than the school gate in September. Not the nervous energy of a new year beginning, but the settled ease of a year that has found its shape. Children who had been strangers in September calling to each other by name. Parents who had been politely unfamiliar in September stopping to talk. The specific accumulated warmth of 9 months of shared mornings, and Celeste was at the gate, and the black car pulled up, and Marco got out and ran directly to Amara, who was already at the gate waiting, and Dante got out, and Dante walked to Celeste, and Dante said, "Good morning," and Celeste said, "Good morning." And Dante reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small envelope, and Dante held it out to Celeste, and Celeste looked at the envelope, and Celeste said, "What is this?" And Dante said, "Marco made it," and Celeste opened the envelope, and inside was a card, handmade construction paper, Marco's precise, careful handwriting on the front, and the card said, "Thank you for being our teacher." Inside the card Marco had written, "My dad said I should give you this because you are the reason Pinecrest is still here. But I think you are the reason a lot of things are still here." And Celeste read the card twice, and Celeste looked up. And Dante was watching her with the expression she had first seen at the school gate in September and had been learning the depth of ever since. The expression of complete and unperformed attention, the expression of a man who is fully present and fully decided and has been for a while. And Celeste said, "He is right, you know, about a lot of things being still here." And Dante said, "He is a perceptive kid." And Celeste said, "He takes after his father." And Dante said, "I am working on being worthy of that." And Celeste said, "I know you are." And the school bell rang, and Marco and Amara ran through the gate together. And Dante and Celeste stood at the school gate in the first warm morning of March, and the neighborhood was behind them and the school was ahead of them, and the year had been what it had been, enormous and difficult and full of things that required everything from both of them, and they were standing in it together. Not perfectly. Not without the weight of what Dante was and what he was trying to leave behind. Not without the questions that Sharon Ackafer's visit had planted in Celeste that she was still carefully working through, but together. Present, decided, and Dante said, "Dinner, this Friday, the four of us." And Celeste said, "Marco will want pancakes." And Dante said, "Marco always wants pancakes." And Celeste said, "So do I actually." And Dante laughed, the real laugh. The quiet, unperformed one that Celeste had been thinking about since the first Tuesday of September. And Celeste smiled. And the gate was warm. And the neighborhood was still there. And so were they. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to drop your comment telling us where you're watching from. Don't forget to watch and subscribe. See you in the next one.